The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of Windsor Castle as Lady Margaret Davies adjusted her ceremonial uniform for the third time. As the newly appointed head of the Royal Protection Unit, she carried the weight of centuries of tradition on her shoulders. Today's ceremony was supposed to be routine, a simple ribbon cutting for the new children's wing at the Royal Hospital. Nothing more than smiles, photographs, and polite applause. Margaret had studied every detail of the security arrangements. The guest list included only trusted members of the royal household, distinguished charitable donors, and a handful of carefully vetted press representatives. Queen Anne, now in her 70s but still remarkably sharp, would arrive at precisely 11 o'clock. The ceremony would last exactly 45 minutes, followed by a brief reception in the castle's rose garden. But something felt different this morning. Margaret couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach like a stone. Perhaps it was the way Camilla had insisted on changing her arrival time at the last minute, claiming her driver was unwell. Or maybe it was the strange conversation she'd overheard between two kitchen staff members about unusual requests for the refreshment arrangements. The castle buzzed with activity as servants polished silver, arranged flowers, and set up chairs in the grand ballroom where the ceremony would take place. Margaret walked through each room, checking sightlines and escape routes, ensuring that every member of her team understood their positions. She had handpicked each officer herself, choosing only those with unblemished records and years of experience protecting the royal family. Detective Inspector James Crawford had been her first choice as second-in-command. A tall, serious man in his early 40s, James possessed an almost supernatural ability to spot trouble before it developed. He'd served in the military before joining the Metropolitan Police, and his instincts had saved more than one royal event from disaster. This morning, he seemed as unsettled as Margaret felt. "Something's not right," James murmured as they conducted their final walkthrough. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and my gut is telling me to be extra careful today." Margaret nodded, trusting his judgment completely. "Double the perimeter guards. I want eyes on every entrance, every window, every possible access point. And keep the communications channel open at all times." The first guests began arriving at 10:30. Lady Pemberton, the hospital's chief patron, swept in wearing an elaborate hat decorated with artificial roses. Sir Charles Whitmore, the Minister of Health, arrived moments later with his usual entourage of assistants and advisors. Each person passed through discreet security checks disguised as simple pleasantries and handshakes. Camilla's car pulled up to the main entrance at 11:15. Margaret watched from an upstairs window as the woman emerged, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress with matching accessories. Everything appeared normal, yet Margaret found herself studying Camilla's every movement with unusual intensity. There was something about her posture, the way she held her handbag, the quick glances she gave to the castle windows that set alarm bells ringing in Margaret's trained mind. Queen Anne's arrival proceeded exactly according to schedule. Her Majesty emerged from the royal car with the grace and dignity that had characterized her entire reign. At 73, she moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that every gesture would be photographed and analyzed. Her powder blue dress had been chosen specifically to complement the hospital's new color scheme, and her smile seemed genuinely warm as she greeted the waiting dignitaries. The ceremony itself began beautifully. Queen Anne delivered her prepared remarks about the importance of children's healthcare with the practiced ease of decades of public speaking. The audience listened respectfully, occasionally breaking into gentle applause at appropriate moments. Photographers captured every angle, their cameras clicking like mechanical insects in the ornate ballroom. Margaret positioned herself near the side wall, where she could observe both the Queen and the assembled guests. Her earpiece crackled softly with routine updates from her team station throughout the castle. Everything remained calm and orderly until Queen Anne approached the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance to a scale model of the new hospital wing. Camilla had been standing quietly in the third row, her hands folded in front of her, apparently absorbed in the proceedings like everyone else. But, as Queen Anne raised the golden scissors to cut the ribbon, Camilla suddenly moved forward with unexpected speed and determination. "Your Majesty," Camilla called out, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "There's something you need to know about this hospital project." Queen Anne paused, the scissors still raised, and turned toward Camilla with the patient expression she reserved for unexpected interruptions. "Yes, my dear? What is it?" But, instead of speaking further, Camilla reached into her handbag. The movement seemed innocent enough, but Margaret's training kicked in immediately. The woman's body language had changed completely. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw set with determination, and her eyes held an intensity that hadn't been there moments before. Margaret's hand moved instinctively toward her radio, but she hesitated, not wanting to cause unnecessary alarm if Camilla was simply retrieving a letter or document to present to the Queen. The split-second delay would haunt her for months afterward. Camilla's hand emerged from her bag holding not a document, but a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Before anyone could react, she lunged forward toward Queen Anne, pulling the stopper from the vial as she moved. "This ends today," Camilla screamed, her composed facade crumbling completely. "All the lies, all the cover-ups, all the innocent people you've hurt." The liquid arced through the air toward Queen Anne's face. Time seemed to slow as Margaret launched herself forward, her body moving before her mind had fully processed what was happening. Behind her, she could hear James shouting orders into his radio and the shocked gasps of the assembled guests. Queen Anne, displaying the remarkable composure that had served her throughout decades of public service, stepped backward and raised her arm to shield her face. Most of the liquid missed its target, splashing harmlessly onto the ornate carpet, but several drops struck her cheek and the collar of her dress. Margaret tackled Camilla from behind, driving both women to the floor in a tangle of limbs and torn fabric. The empty vial rolled across the marble floor, coming to rest against the base of a marble column. Camilla fought with surprising strength, clawing at Margaret's face and trying to reach toward Queen Anne even as she was pinned down. "Get Her Majesty out of here," Margaret commanded, struggling to maintain her grip on the writhing woman beneath her. "Medical team to the ballroom immediately." James and two other officers surrounded Queen Anne, forming a protective barrier as they guided her toward the nearest exit. Her Majesty's training in crisis management served her well. She moved quickly but without panic, her head held high despite the burning sensation spreading across her cheek where the unknown liquid had made contact. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests who had been sitting quietly moments before were now pushing toward the exits, some screaming, others standing frozen in shock. The carefully orchestrated ceremony had become a crime scene in the span of 30 seconds. Dr. Patricia Wells, the castle's resident physician, arrived within minutes, her medical bag already in hand. She immediately began examining Queen Anne's face and neck, looking for signs of chemical burns or allergic reaction. The liquid had left red marks on her skin, but thankfully appeared to be more irritating than truly harmful. "We need to get you to the medical wing immediately, Your Majesty," Dr. Wells said firmly. "I want to flush the affected area and run some tests to determine exactly what this substance was." Meanwhile, Margaret had successfully subdued Camilla with the help of two additional officers. They lifted the woman to her feet, her wrists secured behind her back with professional restraints. Camilla's elegant dress was torn and disheveled, her carefully styled hair now hanging loose around her flushed face. "You don't understand," Camilla gasped, still struggling against her restraints. "She has to know the truth about what happened to my daughter. Sarah didn't die in an accident. They covered it up, all of them. The hospital, the royal physicians, everyone." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a random attack by a disturbed individual. Camilla clearly believed she had genuine grievances against the royal family. Understanding her motivations would be crucial to determining whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger threat. "Take her to the secure holding room," Margaret instructed her team. "Full medical examination, psychological evaluation, and I want every detail of her background investigated immediately. Check her home, her communications, her financial records, everything." The ballroom gradually emptied as the remaining guests were escorted to safety. Crime scene technicians arrived to photograph everything and collect samples of the spilled liquid. Margaret walked carefully around the perimeter of the room, noting details and angles, building a mental picture of exactly how the attack had unfolded. The ceremonial ribbon still hung across the model hospital entrance, cut halfway through where Queen Anne's scissors had begun their work. The golden scissors themselves lay forgotten on a nearby table, a reminder of how quickly celebration had turned to crisis. James approached with his preliminary report. The liquid appears to be some kind of acid solution, but not concentrated enough to cause permanent damage. The chemical analysis will take several hours, but initial tests suggest it might have been intended more to frighten than to seriously injure.
Margaret nodded grimly. That could make this even more dangerous.
If she was trying to make a statement rather than cause actual harm, she might not be finished.
What do we know about her background?
Camilla Richardson, age 47, lives alone in a flat in Kensington. Her daughter Sarah died 3 years ago during a routine surgery at the Royal Children's Hospital. Officially ruled as complications from anesthesia, but apparently Camilla never accepted that explanation. The pieces began falling into place. Margaret remembered reading about the case in the security briefings. A young girl had died during what should have been a simple procedure, and her mother had spent months demanding investigations and making allegations of negligence. The hospital administration had conducted thorough reviews and found no evidence of wrongdoing, but grief-stricken parents often struggled to accept such conclusions.
Has she made threats before? Margaret asked.
Nothing direct, but she's been writing letters to various royal officials for the past 2 years. Mostly requests for meetings or investigations, but the tone became increasingly desperate and accusatory over time. The correspondence was flagged by our monitoring system, but she never made any specific threats of violence.
Margaret cursed silently.
In hindsight, the warning signs seemed obvious, but they received hundreds of similar letters every month from people seeking royal intervention in personal grievances.
Distinguishing between harmless petitioners and genuine threats required resources they simply didn't have.
Queen Anne was receiving treatment in the castle's medical wing, where Dr. Wells had thoroughly cleaned the affected areas and applied soothing ointments. Her Majesty's skin showed signs of mild irritation but no serious damage. More importantly, her spirits remained remarkably high despite the traumatic experience. "I do hope that poor woman gets the help she needs," Queen Anne said as Dr. Wells completed her examination. "Losing a child must be the most terrible thing imaginable. I can understand how grief might drive someone to desperate actions." Margaret marveled at the Queen's compassion even after being attacked. It was exactly the kind of response that had made her beloved by the British people throughout her long reign. But Margaret's job was protection, not understanding, and she needed to focus on ensuring this incident couldn't be repeated. The secure holding room where Camilla was being detained was located in the castle's basement, originally designed as wine storage but converted for security purposes during the 20th century. Camilla sat on a simple bench, her hands still restrained, staring at the stone walls with vacant eyes. The fight seemed to have drained out of her completely. Margaret entered the room with James and a psychological evaluation specialist, Dr. Martin Hayes. They had decided to conduct an initial interview before transferring Camilla to a more secure facility for formal processing.
"Mrs.
Richardson," Margaret began carefully, "I need you to understand that you've committed a very serious crime today.
Assaulting the Queen is treason, which carries severe penalties.
But, before we proceed with charges, I'd like to understand why you felt this was your only option." Camilla looked up slowly, her eyes focusing on Margaret with difficulty.
She promised to look into Sarah's death personally.
3 years ago, she wrote me a letter saying the royal family would ensure a thorough investigation.
But nothing happened.
Nothing ever happens when ordinary people die because of their negligence.
What exactly do you believe happened to your daughter? Dr. Hayes asked gently. The anesthesiologist was drunk.
I could smell alcohol on his breath when I saw him before the surgery. But they covered it up, destroyed the evidence, paid off anyone who might have talked.
Sarah was just 8 years old.
She trusted them, and they killed her through their carelessness. Margaret exchanged glances with James. If Camilla's allegations were true, it would represent a massive scandal that could shake public confidence in both the royal family and the healthcare system.
But grief and desperation could also create elaborate conspiracy theories where simple tragedies had occurred.
Did you report these concerns to the proper authorities?
Margaret continued. I reported them to everyone. The hospital administration, the medical board, the police, the coroner, members of parliament, and, finally, the royal household itself. They all gave me the same response: sincere condolences, but no real investigation. The official cause of death never changed. Dr. Hayes leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Richardson, I can see that you're in tremendous pain over your daughter's death. That kind of loss can make it very difficult to accept random tragedy. Sometimes our minds create explanations that feel more manageable than senseless accidents. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Camilla snapped, her composure cracking again. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. My daughter died because someone was negligent, and then everyone in power conspired to protect their own reputations instead of seeking justice. The interview continued for another hour, but Camilla's story remained consistent. She genuinely believed that her daughter had been killed through medical negligence and that a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of British society had covered up the truth. Whether her beliefs were accurate or the product of grief-induced paranoia would require extensive investigation to determine. As evening fell over Windsor Castle, Margaret stood in her office reviewing the events of the day. The ceremony had been cancelled, the guests sent home with carefully worded explanations about a minor security incident. The press had been given a brief statement acknowledging that someone had been detained for inappropriate behavior during the ceremony, but the full details would remain classified pending investigation. Queen Anne had insisted on continuing with her scheduled evening engagements, showing no signs of lasting trauma from the attack. Her resilience was remarkable, but Margaret knew that attempted regicide, regardless of the perpetrator's mental state, would have far-reaching consequences for royal security protocols. The preliminary analysis of the liquid Camilla had confirmed James's initial assessment. It was a mild acid solution, possibly homemade, that would have caused painful but temporary burns. The intent seemed to have been humiliation and attention-seeking rather than permanent injury or death. But Margaret's concerns extended beyond this single incident. If Camilla Richardson's grievances were shared by other families who felt wronged by royal institutions, they could be facing a broader security threat. The monarchy's strength had always depended on public trust and affection. If that foundation eroded, protecting the royal family would become exponentially more difficult. James knocked on her office door, carrying a thick folder of documents. The background investigation is complete. Mrs. Richardson's story checks out, at least partially. Her daughter did die during surgery at the Royal Children's Hospital, and she has been making formal complaints about the incident for 3 years. Any evidence supporting her allegations about negligence or cover-ups? Nothing concrete, but there are some inconsistencies in the hospital records that might warrant further investigation. The anesthesiologist she mentioned was transferred to another facility shortly after the incident, and his employment records from that period have been sealed by court order. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. Sealed by whom? Unknown. The order came from a high court judge, but the reasoning is classified. It could be routine privacy protection, or it could suggest that someone wanted to limit scrutiny of the case. The implications were staggering. If there was any truth to Camilla's allegations, the attack on Queen Anne could be just the beginning of a much larger scandal. And if the royal family had been involved in covering up medical negligence that resulted in a child's death, the damage to their reputation could be irreparable. Margaret walked to her window and looked out over the castle grounds, where security lights now illuminated every pathway and entrance. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions about how to proceed with the investigation, how much to reveal to the public, and how to protect Queen Anne from any additional threats. But tonight, as she listened to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle settling around her, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the attack in the ballroom had opened a door that could never be closed again. The carefully maintained balance between royal privilege and public accountability was about to be tested in ways that none of them were prepared for. The morning after the attack brought no relief to Margaret Davies. She had spent most of the night reviewing security footage, reading background reports, and coordinating with various agencies about how to handle Camilla Richardson's detention. By dawn, what had seemed like an isolated incident was beginning to reveal connections to a much more complex web of institutional failures and cover-ups.
Detective Chief Inspector William Morrison arrived at Windsor Castle at 7 o'clock sharp, carrying the authority of Scotland Yard's Special Crimes Unit. A man in his early 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes, Morrison had built his reputation handling sensitive cases that involved prominent public figures. His presence indicated that the government was taking Camilla's allegations very seriously indeed. "Lady Davies," Morrison said as he settled into the chair across from Margaret's desk, "I've been briefed on yesterday's incident, but I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Is this woman a lone wolf acting out of grief, or do we have evidence of a broader conspiracy?" Margaret spread the accumulated files across her desk. "That's what we're trying to determine." Mrs. Richardson's story about her daughter's death has remained completely consistent through multiple interviews. More troubling, we're finding gaps and inconsistencies in the official records that seem to support at least some of her claims. Morrison picked up the hospital incident report and read through it carefully. "This is remarkably brief for a case involving the death of a child during routine surgery. Where's the detailed surgical report? The anesthesia records? The post-incident investigation? That's just it, they're missing or sealed. We've requested copies through official channels, but we're being told that patient privacy laws prevent disclosure. Even to law enforcement investigating an attempted assassination." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. If someone was using privacy laws to obstruct a legitimate investigation, it suggested coordination at very high levels. Morrison had seen similar patterns in cases involving government corruption and institutional cover-ups. James Crawford joined them shortly after 8, carrying fresh intelligence that would reshape their understanding of the case entirely. "We've received a response to our background check on the anesthesiologist Camilla mentioned, Dr. Jeffrey Hartwell. He left the Royal Children's Hospital 3 months after Sarah Richardson's death and has since moved to Switzerland." "Switzerland?" Morrison raised an eyebrow. "That's convenient for someone trying to avoid British jurisdiction. What reason did he give for leaving?" "Family reasons, according to his personnel file." But here's where it gets interesting. Dr. Hartwell received a substantial financial settlement from his medical insurance company around the same time, officially described as compensation for emotional distress following the child's death. Margaret felt pieces clicking together in her mind. How substantial? £200,000. For emotional distress. That's unusually generous, especially when there was supposedly no finding of negligence or malpractice. Morrison leaned back in his chair, processing this information. So we have a doctor who may have been intoxicated during surgery, a child who died under suspicious circumstances, missing medical records, sealed court documents, and a very large insurance payout. That's not grief-induced paranoia, that's a pattern of cover-up. But their investigation was about to become even more complicated. Margaret's phone rang with news that would transform yesterday's security incident into a potential constitutional crisis. "Lady Davies, this is Secretary Phillips from the Palace Press Office. We have a problem. Someone has leaked details about yesterday's incident to the media, and the story is about to break on the morning news programs. They know about the attack, they know about Mrs. Richardson's allegations, and they're asking very specific questions about the Royal Children's Hospital." Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. "How much do they know?" "Enough to make this a front-page scandal. The BBC is leading with Royal Attack Exposes Hospital Cover-Up, and The Times has obtained copies of some of Mrs. Richardson's correspondence with royal officials. This is going to be everywhere within the hour." As if summoned by the mention of media coverage, Margaret's assistant appeared in the doorway with an urgent expression. "Ma'am, Queen Anne is requesting an immediate meeting with you and Chief Inspector Morrison. She's in the blue drawing room." They found Her Majesty standing by the tall windows overlooking the castle gardens, her posture erect but her face showing the strain of the past 24 hours. She turned as they entered, and Margaret was struck by the steely determination in the Queen's eyes. "Gentlemen, Lady Davies, please sit down. We have very little time before this situation becomes a public crisis, and I need to understand exactly what we're facing." Morrison cleared his throat carefully. "Your Majesty, based on our preliminary investigation, it appears that Mrs. Richardson's allegations may have some foundation. There are significant irregularities in the handling of her daughter's case that suggest possible negligence and subsequent cover-up. Queen Anne absorbed this information with the composure that had served her throughout decades of crisis management.
Are you telling me that a child died due to medical negligence at a hospital bearing the royal name, and that officials covered it up to protect the institution's reputation? That's one possible explanation, Your Majesty.
We're still gathering evidence, but the pattern is troubling.
And now Mrs. Richardson has attempted to assault me in order to force attention to her daughter's case?
Yes, Your Majesty. She appears to have concluded that dramatic action was the only way to break through what she perceived as a conspiracy of silence. Queen Anne walked slowly to her desk and picked up a leather-bound folder that Margaret recognized as containing the morning's press summaries. Then, we must ensure that Sarah Richardson receives the justice her mother has been seeking, whatever the cost to the royal family's reputation. Margaret felt a surge of admiration for the Queen's moral courage, but her professional instincts demanded caution. Your Majesty, if we acknowledge that there may have been a cover-up, we could be opening ourselves to enormous legal and political liability. Lady Davies, I have spent 70 years in public service trying to uphold the principle that the monarchy exists to serve the people, not the other way around. If institutions bearing the royal name have failed in that responsibility, then we must take whatever steps are necessary to make it right. The Queen's determination was admirable, but Morrison understood the practical implications better than anyone. Your Majesty, once we open this investigation publicly, we won't be able to control where it leads. If there was indeed a cover-up involving royal officials, it could implicate people at the highest levels of your household.
Then, so be it.
Chief Inspector Morrison, I am formally requesting that you conduct a full investigation into Sarah Richardson's death and the subsequent handling of her mother's complaints. You will have complete access to royal records and personnel, and you will report your findings publicly regardless of whom they might implicate. Margaret's phone buzzed with another urgent message. The media storm was intensifying faster than anyone had anticipated. News vans were already gathering outside the castle gates, and social media was exploding with speculation about royal cover-ups and institutional corruption. But the most concerning development came in a call from the Home Secretary's office. The government was deeply concerned about the potential impact on public confidence in royal institutions, and there were already discussions about limiting the scope of any investigation to prevent further damage. Your Majesty, Margaret said carefully, I'm receiving pressure from government officials to contain this situation.
They're worried about the broader implications for institutional trust.
Queen Anne's response was immediate and uncompromising. Lady Davies, I want you to understand something very clearly.
The royal family's legitimacy depends entirely on public trust.
If we are seen to be covering up wrongdoing or protecting institutional interests over justice for ordinary citizens, that trust will be irreparably damaged.
Morrison nodded approvingly. Your Majesty is absolutely right.
In my experience, attempted cover-ups always cause more damage than the original wrongdoing. If we're transparent about investigating Mrs. Richardson's claims, we can demonstrate that royal institutions are capable of self-correction and accountability. But their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edmund Blackwood, the Queen's principal private secretary. A tall, austere man in his early 60s, Sir Edmund had served the royal family for over 30 years and was known for his fierce protection of royal prerogatives. Your Majesty, I must strongly advise against any public investigation of this matter. We have reports that Mrs. Richardson has been in contact with several anti-monarchy groups over the past year. This could be part of a coordinated campaign to damage the institution rather than a genuine search for justice. Margaret felt her stomach clench.
What kind of contact?
Sir Edmund consulted his notes with obvious reluctance. She attended several meetings of the Republican Alliance, a group that advocates for the abolition of the monarchy.
She also made financial contributions to organizations that campaign for institutional transparency and accountability. Morrison frowned. That doesn't necessarily undermine her allegations about her daughter's death. Grief and anger at institutional failures often drive people toward political activism.
Perhaps, Chief Inspector, but it does raise questions about her ultimate motives.
Are we really prepared to subject the monarchy to a potentially destructive investigation based on the word of someone who has been associated with Republican movements?
Queen Anne had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience.
Sir Edmund, are you suggesting that Mrs. Richardson's political associations somehow invalidate her right to seek justice for her daughter's death?
I'm suggesting, Your Majesty, that we must consider the broader context. This woman has demonstrated a pattern of activism against royal institutions. Yesterday's attack may have been calculated to force exactly the kind of investigation that could severely damage the monarchy's standing. Margaret found herself caught between competing loyalties. Her duty was to protect the Queen and the institution she represented, but she also believed in the principles of justice and accountability that the monarchy was supposed to embody. Your Majesty, she said carefully, perhaps we could pursue a middle course. A thorough but discreet investigation that focuses on the medical facts without unnecessary public attention. But Queen Anne had made up her mind. No, Lady Davies. If Mrs. Richardson has resorted to violence because she felt her concerns were being ignored, then discretion has clearly failed.
We will investigate these allegations openly and transparently, whatever the consequences. Sir Edmund's face darkened.
Your Majesty, I feel compelled to warn you that such a course could have devastating consequences for the monarchy. If the investigation reveals negligence or cover-up involving royal institutions, it could fuel Republican sentiment and undermine centuries of constitutional tradition. Sir Edmund, Queen Anne replied with quiet authority, if the monarchy cannot survive the revelation of truth, then perhaps it doesn't deserve to survive at all.
The room fell silent as the implications of the Queen's statement sank in.
She was prepared to risk the institution she had spent her entire life serving in order to ensure justice for one grieving mother and her dead child.
Morrison broke the silence.
Your Majesty, if you're determined to proceed with a full investigation, I'll need complete access to all records relating to Sarah Richardson's case. That includes medical files, insurance records, correspondence with royal officials, and any other relevant documentation.
You shall have it, Chief Inspector.
Sir Edmund, please ensure that all departments cooperate fully with this investigation. But Sir Edmund wasn't finished. Your Majesty, I must also inform you that we've received intelligence suggesting that Mrs. Richardson may not have acted alone yesterday. There are indications that other families with similar grievances against royal institutions may be planning additional protests or demonstrations. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine.
What kind of indications?
Social media monitoring has identified several groups organizing around themes of royal accountability and institutional justice. They're using Mrs. Richardson's attack as a rallying point for broader criticism of royal privilege and protection of wrongdoing. The situation was evolving beyond anyone's ability to control. What had begun as a single woman's desperate attempt to gain attention for her daughter's death was becoming a focal point for broader social and political tensions about privilege, accountability, and justice. Morrison stood up, recognizing that time was running out before events overtook their ability to respond effectively.
Your Majesty, I need to begin this investigation immediately.
The longer we delay, the more time there is for evidence to disappear or witnesses to coordinate their stories.
Queen Anne nodded firmly. Proceed, Chief Inspector. And I want regular updates on your progress.
As the meeting broke up, Margaret found herself walking with Morrison toward the castle's main entrance. The morning sun was now fully up, and she could see news vans and cameras positioned beyond the castle gates. The story was already beyond containment.
Chief Inspector, she said quietly, what do you really think we're going to find? Morrison paused before answering.
In my experience, Lady Davies, when people go to extraordinary lengths to cover something up, it's usually because there's something significant to hide. Mrs. Richardson may be right about more than we want to believe. The next few hours would determine whether the royal family could navigate this crisis while maintaining public trust, or whether Camilla Richardson's desperate act would trigger the kind of institutional reckoning that Sir Edmund feared most. As Margaret watched Morrison's car disappear down the castle drive, she realized that yesterday's attack had changed everything. The careful balance between royal privilege and public accountability was about to be tested in ways that none of them could fully predict or control. The phone in her pocket buzzed with another urgent message. The Prime Minister's office was requesting an immediate briefing on the situation. Parliament was asking questions. The international media was beginning to pick up the story. Sarah Richardson's death 3 years earlier had been a private tragedy that affected only her immediate family. But her mother's attack on Queen Anne was about to transform it into a public crisis that could reshape the British monarchy forever. 3 days after the attack, Detective Chief Inspector Morrison's investigation had uncovered a trail of evidence that threatened to expose the most significant royal scandal in decades. Working from a temporary command center established in Windsor Castle's East Wing, his team had methodically dismantled what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated cover-up involving dozens of officials across multiple institutions. The breakthrough had come when Morrison obtained a court order forcing the release of Dr. Geoffrey Hartwell's sealed employment records. The documents revealed a pattern of alcohol-related incidents that the Royal Children's Hospital Administration had systematically ignored or concealed. On the day Sarah Richardson died, hospital security footage showed Dr. Hartwell arriving at work visibly intoxicated, yet he had been allowed to proceed with scheduled surgeries. Margaret Davies stood in the command center reviewing the evidence boards that now covered 3 walls. Photographs, documents, timelines, and relationship charts painted a picture of institutional failure that went far beyond simple medical negligence. The cover-up had involved hospital administrators, royal officials, insurance executives, and government ministers, all working together to protect their respective institutions from scandal. "The scope is staggering," Morrison said as he joined Margaret beside the evidence wall. "We're not looking at a single incident of malpractice, but a systematic pattern of covering up problems to protect institutional reputations." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant brought in to analyze the financial records, approached with a thick folder of documents. "Chief Inspector, I've completed my analysis of the insurance payments and related transactions. The pattern suggests coordination at the highest levels." She opened her folder and spread several charts across a nearby table. Dr. Hartwell's insurance settlement was only the beginning. The hospital received a substantial increase in royal patronage funding shortly after Sarah's death. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy was promoted to a senior position in the royal medical household. Even the nurse who was on duty that day received an unusually generous pension enhancement. Margaret felt sick as she absorbed the implications. They bought everyone's silence. It appears so. And the funding for these payments can be traced back through a complex network of royal trusts and charitable foundations. Someone with access to significant royal resources orchestrated this entire cover-up. Morrison studied the financial flowcharts with growing anger. How many other cases might there be? If they were willing to go to these lengths to cover up one child's death, what else might they have hidden? The question would be answered sooner than any of them expected. Morrison's team had set up a confidential hotline for families who believed they had been wronged by royal institutions, and the phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. By the end of the 3rd day, they had received over 200 calls from people claiming similar experiences of institutional cover-ups and silencing. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, a former nurse at the Royal Children's Hospital, had been the first to come forward with corroborating testimony. Now in her early 50s, she had left the hospital shortly after Sarah Richardson's death, officially due to family relocations but actually because she had been horrified by what she witnessed. "I tried to report Dr. Hartwell's condition that morning," she told Morrison during a recorded interview. "I could smell alcohol on his breath, and his hands were shaking. But when I approached the charge nurse, I was told that Dr. Hartwell was under stress due to personal problems and that I should mind my own business." "What happened when the child died during surgery?" Morrison asked. There was immediate panic among the senior staff. "Within hours, we were all called into individual meetings with hospital administrators and told that discussing the case with anyone, including family members, would result in immediate dismissal and possible legal action for breaching patient confidentiality." "Did you believe the official explanation that the death was due to unexpected complications?" Dr. Hayes shook her head firmly. "I've been a surgical nurse for 25